I'm Katrien Devolder. This is the Practical Ethics channel.
My father had dementia. I know many people whose parents have dementia, partners have dementia and so on. And it's not obvious when this starts to happen that, if you ask them a question and they don't know the answer, there's a real tendency to think, oh, that's it, they've lost that memory. So I think the knowledge that memory works in different ways and that you can just sort of work around a memory and get the associations going and then get some uptake, which you wouldn't get just by asking an explicit question. That's hard to come by. And I think government, or at least, the health service, does have some obligation to help families and relatives understand that that's happening.
Today I'll be talking to Richard Holton, who's Professor of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge. Professor Holton just gave the Uehiro lectures here at the University of Oxford. The theme was illness and the social self. He talked about dementia, addiction and psychosomatic disorders. This video focuses on dementia. Addiction and psychosomatic disorders are addressed in separate videos on the Practical Ethics channel. Professor Holton, welcome to the Practical Ethics channel and thanks very much for being here.
So I'd first like to talk a little bit about dementia. So one of the central features of dementia is progressive memory loss. So those who know or have known someone with dementia often say that it's like the person is gradually disappearing. So is that an accurate description? Is it true that if someone's memory is disappearing, the whole person is disappearing?
I think it's complicated. I don't think that memory is the only thing that's important to a person's personality. So I think there are lots of personality traits and other things which can persist even if memory is lost. So that's the first thing to say. It's not just to do with memory. Also, I think memory is a very complicated thing. So there are different sorts of memory, and dementia initially typically targets the specific memories of particular events that people have. So specific memories of specific occurrences, those tend to be lost. But memory, what's called semantic memory, that doesn't just include memory for words and things like that, but memory for facts, including facts about one's own past, things like that. That's often still there. Even amongst that semantic memory, though, it's not always easily accessible. So there's a lot of memory that is there, but that the person can't bring forward very easily. So you see that when you do things like priming experiments. So if you say a word to someone having subliminally flashed another word on the screen first, an ordinary subject, if you flash a word first on the screen which is in the same class as the second word, they'll recognize the second word faster. If you do that to someone with Alzheimer's disease, they do nearly as well as an ordinary subject. So it shows those memories are still there, that the links are still there, the connections are still there, but the subject might find it very hard to access those.
So people who have a loved one with dementia often feel powerless as the condition deteriorates. But you think there's actually something they can do to help the person with dementia. So what is that?
Yeah, so I think there's a strong tendency if your partner or a parent or something is suffering from dementia, to desperately try and sort of hang on to the memories that are there by, asking them more questions and reminding them of things and trying to get it to stick. And that often doesn't work. And in fact, not only does it often not work, it often makes things worse because the patient realizes how badly they're doing and then they become anxious and upset about it. So I think the thing to do for many people, dementia presents differently in different people, but for a lot of people, the thing to do is not to try and ask questions. It's not to come in with a sort of interrogative way of going on. It's to just come in and start talking about the things that you have in common and sort of building a framework within which the person can then respond. And that approach, given what we know about the way the long-term memory that's left works, looks to be much more likely to get a response from the person. And probably then, in getting that response, to get them into a frame of mind that can be associated with the things you're talking about, especially if those are happy memories or things they value, things that they care about a lot.
So the environment of the people with dementia is very important. So the people around the person,
Yes.
They have to sort of help retain the identity?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that to get those long-term memories working, they need to be cued in the right way. And it's of the nature of dementia that most people are not going to be, going around the world seeing the cues that would probably initially have been associated with those memories. So if you're going to get them going again, that's going to be done by and large by people. I mean, there are some other circumstances that can do it. So there's evidence that the sort of lucid moments that people with dementia have sometimes, which typically involves them doing much better than you would expect, those are often provoked by things like going for a walk with someone. So you do get a stimulus from outside. But a lot of it, especially the very specific stimulation of memory, has got to be done by other people around them, typically their loved ones or people who know what they've done, what they've been through, and so on. So I think, yes, the task of sort of keeping your identity together, which is always something of a social thing. I mean, you're always using the other people around you to reinforce your social identity. That now shifts more onto them and less from the subject, because the subject doesn't have the ways of holding it together that they had.
So there's an implication of your view that the mind of a person with dementia sort of resides partly in the brains of their friends and family.
Yes, I think that's right. So this is a topic which some philosophers have been thinking about, that the mind is extended, as people sometimes say. That is, you shouldn't think of the mind as only being contained within the brain, because we use other prompts around us all the time. And I think this is a case where something like that does happen. I mean, I think if you're really going to think what you're doing there is getting a memory going and not just having the people around you talk about you, then there has to be some response from the subject. That is, has to be some degree of recognition. They have to sort of pick up on what's happening. But I think the degree to which people pick up can be quite small, and yet you still realise that this really is their memory which you're holding together, helping to hold together for them. And you see that sort of uptake just, in an expression, in a smile, in a nod, something that acknowledges that they know you in some sense, they know what you're talking about in some sense.
So does the role of relatives and friends in maintaining sort of the identity of the person with dementia give them a special right to participate in medical decision-making about the person?
Yes, I think it probably does. I mean, I think of necessity, typically decisions about treatment are made by the medical staff, the doctor concerned, nursing staff, and family and friends. And you might think, well, that's just by default, right? Because who else could do it? But I think it's actually deeper than that. I think in most of these cases, if you've got family and friends there who know and care for the person, there's a sense in which they can sort of continue that personality on into those decision-making moments. Even at the point there, I think, where the patient might be in a state where they really can't understand a lot of the questions that are being asked.
So should governments take more steps to improve the social buttressing of people with dementia?
Yes, it's interesting to think about what they could do. I mean, one thing I think that is certainly good is to understand the ways in which you can communicate with people, because it's far from self-evident, I think. So my father had dementia. I know many people whose parents have dementia, partners have dementia, and so on. And it's not obvious when this starts to happen that, if you ask them a question and they don't know the answer, there's a real tendency to think, oh, that's it, they've lost that memory. So I think the knowledge that memory works in different ways, and that you can just sort of work around a memory and get the associations going and then get some uptake, which you wouldn't get just by asking an explicit question, that's hard to come by. And I think government, or at least, the health service, does have some obligation to help families and relatives understand that that's happening.
So another question. So should we respect the advanced directives of people with dementia?
Yes, this too is a difficult question. So these people might write an advanced directive saying, for instance, that if they come to suffer from fairly advanced dementia, they don't want to have very active interventions, medical interventions. So, they might not want to be treated with antibiotics if they go down with a bad infection or something like that. Or, they don't want to have surgery, they don't want to be treated for other things like that. And there's been some concern about how authoritative those are. And I think the real worry a lot of people have is that if the patient with dementia is very disconnected from their earlier self who wrote the directive, then what authority does that directive have for them? I mean, clearly if the directive were written by somebody else, it wouldn't have any authority. So why should it have authority now if the links between the earlier self and the current self are so attenuated? There, I think that actually there are more connections than you might realize, and they're exactly the sort of connections that we've been talking about. So whereas it may be that explicit memory looks to have gone, there might be a great deal of implicit memory left. And I think that's part of what ties together the person who wrote the advance directive and the person who's suffering. I think even beyond that, the social network which family provides does provide a way of sort of buttressing the person over time. And I think that again is part of what makes the advance directive still authoritative for the person in the later state. So yes, by and large, I think you should respect those advance directives, and I think this gives a bit of a framework for understanding that.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Practical Ethics channel.